The palace was full of hallways no one used anymore. Servants whispered about them, quiet stories of older wings sealed after the last war, rooms where voices echoed too long, where gods once lived and no longer listened. Evren hadn't meant to find one, but he had a habit of walking where he wasn't watched. That afternoon, while pretending to study the history of Kailarun border treaties, he slipped down a corridor behind the library, a narrow path choked with dust and low light. The marble changed, the walls narrowed, the air smelled different, older, less like perfume and ash, more like earth and something burned long ago. He reached a heavy wooden door. The handle was rusted. A symbol had once been carved into the wood, now half chiseled out a sunburst pattern, familiar in a way that made his chest ache. He pushed the door open. The hinges creaked. No one came. Inside is pure silence. Stone floors, worn by time. Empty torch brackets. A raised altar at the far end, cloaked in shadow. Broken statues of once beautiful figures, their faces smashed in, arms missing. And at the center of the back wall, faded but still visible, was the Lion of Varelia. Evren stepped inside. Dust swirled around his boots. He didn't pray. He just stood there, eyes locked on that lion, as if daring it to still mean something. Then, quietly, he left. That night, he returned with no sounds, just the moonlight cutting across the stones as he pushed the door open again. This time, he knelt, not because he believed or hoped, but because there were no witnesses, and something inside him still remembered the words, even if he couldn't bring himself to speak them aloud. The dust was thicker at night. It clung to the air, to the edges of every broken sculpture, every crack in the floor. Moonlight filtered through a high, narrow window, catching motes as they floated, still and slow. Evren stepped inside without sound. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. He moved across the stone floor, his steps careful, not from fear but reverence. The altar at the far end hadn't been cleaned in years. Its surface was coated in ash and age. Once, it would have held flowers, candles, coins left by supplicants. Now, only dust. He reached out and brushed a finger across the top. The trail he left behind looked like a scar. Beneath the grime, the faint outline of a Varelian prayer circle remained, sunburst lines carved into the stone, radiating outward from a central mark, the lion's eye. He knelt there. The posture came easily. Muscle memory from a time when he believed in something higher than survival. The old prayers crowded his throat, but he kept his mouth closed. Words didn't belong here anymore. What would he even say? That he missed a country that betrayed itself? That he lived in the palace of the man who destroyed it, and couldn't decide if he hated that man more or less than he should? His fingers touched the floor, tracing the carved lines, circling the lion's eye again and again. He wasn't hoping. He just needed to remember what it felt like to kneel in silence, in a place where he didn't have to pretend. Even if the gods were broken, even if they'd never listened at all, the silence held him. Evren stayed kneeling, eyes on the broken altar, fingers resting lightly against the old sunburst carving. His breath was slow, even, then a sound with soft bootsteps on stone. He turned his head. Kael stood in the doorway, just the Emperor, alone, outlined in the pale light from the hallway behind him. Evren didn't move, didn't speak. His first instinct was to rise, to defend, to prepare for what would follow: a lecture, an accusation, maybe the flash of soldiers behind him. But Kael did none of those things. He stepped inside, closed the door, and walked slowly across the forgotten shrine, toward the altar. When he reached Evren, he stopped. They looked at each other. Kael's face was unreadable, not angry, not surprised. He glanced down at the faded sunburst. Then, without speaking, he knelt, right beside him. The space between them was only inches, but it felt deeper than the past. Kael didn't touch him, didn't ask why, didn't try to own the silence. He just stayed there, head slightly bowed, hands resting on his thighs. Two men, side by side, one born of faith, one raised from war, both now kneeling before gods that no longer answered. Time moved strangely in the shrine. It could have been minutes, could have been longer. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of everything they wouldn't say aloud. Evren didn't know why Kael had followed him. He didn't know why Kael had stayed. He only knew that it wasn't a performance. Just Kael, kneeling in the dark beside a man raised to hate him. Evren looked straight ahead. The altar hadn't changed. The dust still clung to every edge. The lion's eye still stared back, hollowed and dim. But Kael's presence made it different. Not better, not worse, just undeniable. For a moment, Evren remembered being a boy bare knees on polished marble, whispering prayers into quiet air, believing someone, somewhere, heard him. Now he whispered nothing, and still Kael knelt beside him. Eventually Kael moved. He stood without a word. Evren didn't rise. Kael didn't demand it. He stepped back once, paused at the door. Their eyes met in the faint light. Just a question that neither of them dared to speak aloud. Then Kael left. The door shut softly behind him. Evren remained kneeling, and for the first time in years, his chest ached with something that wasn't anger or hunger or grief. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't faith. It was something harder, something quieter, something he didn't yet have a name for.